I have rung the bells at St. Aldhelm's for 41 years, and buried more of the parish than I care to count, and I thought by 73, I had seen every shape grief and shame could take in a churchyard. I had not seen it in a dining hall until the winter, the Board of Guardians came to inspect the Union Workhouse, and a chimney sweep's orphaned girl sat down at a piano nobody had asked her to touch. I was there as a subscriber, nothing more. 40 years of small parish donations had earned me a chair at the annual Christmas inspection, at the long table's low end, among the aldermen's wives and the wool merchant who funded the boys' boots. The hall had been dressed for the occasion, holly nailed along the rafters, the long tables scrubbed pale, the workhouse children lined against the far wall in their gray wool, hands folded, eyes down. I know the look of people arranged for approval. I have set enough headstones straight before a family's first visit to know what it costs to make a hard thing look tidy. The inspection had already gone on an hour by the time we reached the dining hall, the dormitories first, blankets folded to a set square inch, then the laundry, steam and lye, then the boys' workshop, where 6 of them stitched boots under a supervisor's eye and stood when the guardians entered, the way soldiers stand. I have inspected churchyards for the diocese often enough to know the rhythm of it. Everything shown in the order that reflects best on the person showing it. The rough parts saved for last, or not shown at all. The matron, Mrs. Strick, walked the guardians through with the particular brightness of a woman who has scoured every surface twice. She was not unkind, I want to say that plainly. She kept the children fed and the floors scrubbed and the accounts straight, and she believed, the way certain women believe in starch, that order was itself a kindness. But she had built her whole authority on being seen to have things in hand, and a woman like that cannot afford surprises in front of 12 guardians and a wool merchant. The surprise was Ivy Coombe. She was 11, small for it, with the kind of watchfulness workhouse children get early, the look of someone who has learned that wanting anything out loud costs more than it's worth. Her father had swept chimneys until a fall 2 winters before, put him in my churchyard. Under a stone I set myself. I remembered her at the graveside, in a borrowed black coat too big in the shoulders, not crying. I had thought of her since, now and again, the way you think of a name on a stone you cut yourself. She had come into the Union with nothing but the coat and a tin box of her father's soot brushes, which the matron had confiscated on the grounds that a workhouse child had no use for tools of a trade she'd never be let practice. I did not know, that Christmas, what had replaced the brushes in whatever she kept instead of a childhood. I only knew, watching her along the wall with the other children, that she stood a half step apart from the line, the way a chipped stone stands a half step out of true, even after you've reset it as best you can. We came to the corner where the old upright piano stood, donated some years back by a dead alderman's widow, kept locked for the look of the thing, as Mrs. Strick put it, a decoration, not an instrument, in a hall, where instruments were not thought necessary for people in Ivy's situation. And there was Ivy, one hand flat on the closed fallboard, not playing, not even trying the lock, just resting her hand there, the way you'd rest a hand on a coffin lid, or a font. I know that gesture. I have made it myself. At gates I had no business opening. Mrs. Strick saw it, and I watched something cross her face. Not real anger, something smaller and more practical. The fear of being caught, not knowing her own house. 12 guardians were watching. "Well," she said, loudly enough to carry, a bright hard voice pitched for the room and not for the girl. "It seems our Ivy fancies herself musical." A ripple of the particular laughter that costs nothing to give and everything to receive. "Go on then." Mrs. Strick unlocked the fallboard herself, with the key from her own chatelaine, and lifted it, and stood back with her hands folded like a woman presenting evidence. "Play something simple for the ladies. A hymn will do, since apparently you think you know how." I have heard many kinds of silence in a church. This was the ordinary kind, chairs creaking, a guardian clearing his throat, someone's spoon set down a fraction too hard. Nobody in that hall expected music. They expected, at most, a child's clumsy stumbling through a hymn tune, 5 seconds of mercy applause, and the matter closed. Ivy sat. She did not look at Mrs. Strick. She looked at the keys the way I look at a stone before I cut the first letter, checking the grain, finding where the give was. Her hands were too small for the reach some of it would need. I did not know that yet. I only knew she adjusted the bench without being told, twice, precisely, the way a person does who has done it 100 times, somewhere nobody was watching. The first notes were quiet, not a hymn. Something minor, something that leaned before it resolved. A woman near me, I never learned her name, one of the guardian's wives, stopped her fork halfway. I will tell you what I know of music, which is nothing. I know weight. 41 years of hauling bell ropes teaches a man what it costs to move something heavy slowly, on purpose, without dropping it. That is what her hands were doing. The tune wanted to rush, and she would not let it. It went out over that hall the way our tenor bell goes out over the churchyard on a still evening. You don't hear it start. You only notice, some seconds in, that everything else has gone quiet to make room for it. The children along the wall had not moved before. Now they moved. Not toward her. They knew better than that, still. But their heads turned, all down the line, like a field of something turning toward light. Mrs. Strick had folded her hands to receive an apology from the room. I watched those hands come slowly unfolded. The tune found its center and stayed there a while, circling something. I did not know then what it circled. I only knew the spoon that had stopped halfway did not go back down to the plate. I knew the wool merchant, 3 seats up, had put his glass down without drinking from it, and left his hand flat on the tablecloth beside it, fingers spread, as though bracing against something. The melody kept returning to the same low phrase, 3 notes descending, then a 4th that never quite landed where the ear expected. A small, patient postponement, over and over, as though the tune itself were putting off a thing it did not want to say plainly. I have heard our organist play sadder music with twice the volume and none of the effect. This was not loud. It did not need to be. A held note in a quiet room does more work than a struck one in a full church, and she seemed to know that the way I know which of our bells carries and which only clangs. Ivy's face did not change. That is the part I remember clearest. The room around her was coming apart in small, silent ways, and she sat perfectly still at the center of it, the way the eye of a thing is always still. It rose, once, into something that was almost a cry, and was not, held back at the last possible moment, the way you hold back a bell so it doesn't crack itself against the frame, and came down again into the same low circling theme, quieter now, quieter than it had started, as though the whole thing were being folded back into a drawer. Somewhere behind me a guardian's wife was crying without any attempt to hide it, handkerchief pressed flat, not dabbing, just pressed there and left. I have conducted funerals with less grief in the room than that dining hall held in the space of 4 minutes over a plate of Christmas goose. The last notes she let go very slowly, one at a time, the way you let a rope out through your hands so the bell doesn't fall so much as arrive, and then her hands came to rest in her lap, and she was still looking at the keys, not at any of us, and the hall did not make a sound. I have rung bells at funerals, where the whole churchyard held its breath like that. It is not a silence you can fake, and it is not a silence you can applaud into. Not straight away. It has to be let alone a moment. The way you let the last stroke of a bell finish dying before the next one starts. Mrs. Strick did not clap. She did not say the bright, hard thing she'd been ready to say before Ivy sat down. She crossed the floor. I watched every step of it, 12, maybe 14 steps, and each one seemed to cost her something she hadn't budgeted for. And she knelt down in front of the girl, which put her, in her good gray inspection dress, on the floor, in front of the whole board of guardians, a thing I am certain she had never once done in that hall in all her years running it. She took off her own shawl. It was good wool, better than anything in that room but the guardians' own coats, and she wrapped it around Ivy's shoulders without a word, and left her hand there a moment on the girl's arm, and that was all. No apology said aloud. I don't believe she had the words ready for one, and I don't believe Ivy needed them said. It was the wool merchant who finally stood, and then the room stood with him, in the ragged, uneven way a room stands when nobody planned it and everybody means it, not the sort of ovation you get at a concert hall, where the clapping starts together because everyone's watched enough of them to know the cue. This was slower, and worse timed, and truer for it. I asked, after, the way you ask after a funeral whose family you didn't know well, quietly, to the right person, once the guardians had gone through to their pudding, and their port, and their talk of the vote to come. The laundry woman found me by the door, drying her hands on her apron, and I asked her plainly whether she'd known the girl could play. "Known it 8 months," she said, not looking surprised that I'd asked. "Kept it quiet as the grave, begging your pardon." She told me the rest in the flat, unhurried way. People tell you things they've been sitting on, and are relieved, finally, to set down. Ivy had been taught in secret, over those 8 months, by a parlor maid named Nettleship, who had left the house that autumn to marry a carter in the next parish, and was gone now, married and settled, likely never to know what had come of the lessons she'd given. Miss Nettleship had learned the piece herself from her own mother, dead the year before that, and had taught it to Ivy in the hour after the little ones were put down, on that same locked piano, using a key she was never meant to have, and returning it to its hook before the matron's morning rounds. "Never played it for a soul but the walls," the laundry woman said. "Not till today. I don't believe she meant to. Even today, I believe Mrs. Strick near enough dragged it out of her." I asked whether Ivy had known what the piece was called, or whose it had first belonged to. The laundry woman shook her head. "That much," she said, "Miss Nettleship had kept to herself, along with most things about her own mother, and Ivy had only ever known it as the tune, the one you play when the little ones are asleep, and there's no one left awake to mind. Ivy had never played it for a living soul until that dining hall. She had only ever played it, as far as anyone could tell me, to an empty room and a dead woman she never got to thank properly for the giving of it. I did not know that while I listened. I only knew, watching her hands come to rest, that I had spent 41 years learning what a bell can carry across a still evening, and that evening, over Christmas goose and holly nailed crooked to the rafters, I learned I had never once asked the same question of a piano. The guardians voted before the pudding was served, not unanimously but near enough, to fund proper lessons for any child in that house who showed the inclination, and to have the old upright tuned, and to leave it unlocked. It has stood open ever since, I am told, though I am an old man now, and don't get to the union as often as I'd like. I think of Ivy Coombs sometimes, ringing the bells on a still evening, the way a note goes out, and you don't notice it's begun, until everything else has already gone quiet to let it through. I think, too, of Mrs. Strick on her knees in her good dress, and I have come to believe that was the truest kindness she ever did in that house. Not the starch, not the scrubbed floors, but the 14 steps she took across a silent room to kneel in front of a child she had meant, not an hour before, only to shame.